The rain didn't start until I reached the third block, but I kept moving anyway. I wasn't running, wasn't even hurrying, just walking. 5 long blocks through sheets of rain after being treated like some charity project in Melissa's parents' dining room. My shirt stuck to my back, soaked clean through. Every step I took made my loafers squish, that awful sound that tells you they're ruined. The leather was done for. My hands were numb, but I didn't care. The fire in my chest burned hotter than the rain was cold. That dinner was supposed to mean something. A step forward. Maybe a sign I'd finally earned a real seat at their table. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories. Instead, her dad came at me with questions like, I was trying to buy a luxury car I couldn't afford. So, what exactly is it that you do? He asked, swirling his wine and eyeing me like I was under a microscope. And how stable is that line of work? Her mom didn't need to say much, just kept that tight little smirk, the kind that tells you she's already written you off, like she decided I was a phase Melissa would grow out of soon enough. But what hit hardest wasn't either of them. It was Melissa. Sitting there, quiet, not a word in my defense. She didn't tell them how I'd been taking care of my dad, or that I ran my own small business fixing transmissions late into the night just to keep the lights on. Nothing. Just silence. Even when her mom joked about men who work with their hands instead of their heads, she stayed still. I didn't make a scene, didn't shout or slam the door. I just said I had an early shift, stood up and walked out. She didn't try to stop me, didn't follow. I stood under the awning for a moment, waiting, thinking maybe she'd come after me, but she didn't. So I stepped into the rain. No umbrella, no ride waiting, just me, drenched shirt, ruined shoes, and a hollow feeling growing in my gut. By the time I found the diner, I looked like something that crawled out of a drain pipe. The guy behind the counter didn't even blink, just poured a cup of black coffee and nodded, like he'd seen worse 100 times. I took a seat in the back booth. The vinyl stuck to my wet jeans. Steam rose off the coffee, fogging the window, but through it I could still see the city lights bleeding through the rain. Each sip tasted bitter, burnt, and tired, but I kept drinking because I needed to keep my hands busy. And all I could think about was how many times I'd told myself I was finally doing it right. Kept my head down, worked every job I could find, looked after my old man, paid off my sister's credit card mess after she disappeared. Then Melissa came along, and for once I thought someone actually saw me, the real me, past the busted knuckles and grease-stained clothes. But when it mattered most, when I was sitting there being picked apart one smug question at a time, she said nothing. And that silence told me everything. So I sat in that booth, soaked, angry, just watching the rain hit the glass like it was trying to wash the night away. For the first time in years, I didn't know what the hell to do next. No plan, no fix, just me. A cold cup of coffee and a list of things I should have seen coming. I didn't sleep that night, stayed right there until the sun came up, watched the rain turn to drizzle, watched the city stretch and wake up like nothing had happened. When I finally stepped outside, the air was heavy, thick, like it couldn't decide whether to stop raining or start again. I went back to the shop, changed into dry clothes, cranked up the heater even though it was August, sat on the floor, leaned against the toolbox, and just breathed. River City isn't a glamorous place. Never was. I grew up on the East End in a 3-bedroom duplex that always smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee. My mom died when I was 8. Heart failure. 1 minute she was folding laundry, and the next the neighbors were pounding on the door while my dad shouted for an ambulance. After that, it was just the two of us. My old man was a mechanic through and through, didn't believe in power steering, called every foreign car a plastic shoebox. He had me gapping spark plugs before I even passed algebra. By 13, I could swap brake pads in my sleep. We didn't have vacations, cable, or takeout, but I never felt poor. He made sure I had clean jeans, a packed lunch, and the kind of pride that doesn't come from money. Then came the stroke. It was a Wednesday. I remember because Tuesdays were slow at the shop. I was 24, halfway through rotating tires on a Honda Odyssey when the call came. They said it was mild, but seeing him try to say his own name and barely get half of it out, there was nothing mild about that. After that, everything shifted. I moved my dad into the small apartment above the garage I just started renting on the edge of town. sold what little he had left to cover the hospital bills. Every morning, I helped him get dressed, watched him struggle to lift a spoon, tried not to let him see how much it tore me up inside. I never complained, just did what had to be done. Started with the basics: oil changes, tune ups, tire patches. Word spread fast in a place like River City. People liked that I charged fair, worked clean, and didn't feed them any lies. Business grew little by little, but I always had this picture stuck in my head: something bigger. I didn't just want to fix what was broken, I wanted to rebuild, bring old machines back to life. Classic trucks, cafe racers, full restorations that turned rust into pride again. That was the dream. Then one afternoon, Melissa rolled in, Mercedes with a flat tire and a cracked rim. I almost didn't bother looking up, figured she was another rich girl too good to call roadside assistance. But she surprised me. Walked right up, reached out her hand, and said, "You're Jake, right? My friend told me you're honest." That caught my attention. She waited while I worked. Sat on the old torn couch I'd hauled in from the curb and started asking questions. Not filler talk, real questions. About the shop, about my dad, about what I wanted for the future. She came back the next week with sandwiches, chicken salad on rye, and sat in the same spot while I rotated her tires. After that, it became a pattern. Mondays and Wednesdays, she'd stop by with lunch. She called me authentic, said I reminded her of how her granddad talked about the American dream. I wanted to believe that. She'd lean across the counter, smiling like she belonged there. Ask if I needed anything. And for a while, I felt steady. Like maybe I wasn't just another grease-covered guy fixing what rich folks didn't value. She didn't flinch at the smell of oil or the dirt under my nails. Didn't act embarrassed by the peeling paint on the garage door or the busted vending machine humming in the corner. For a time, it felt real. But looking back now, I should have known better. She never once invited me to her place. There was always an excuse. Her parents were visiting, her roommate was sick, the place was messy. Sometimes her friends would pull up in their shiny SUVs, music blasting, laughing with their windows half down. "Oh, this is where he works," they'd say, voices dripping with pity. One time I stepped outside with a torque wrench and heard one of them mutter, "God, it smells like sweat and sadness." Melissa rolled her eyes, but she didn't say a word. Still, I told myself it was fine. She was there. She showed up. She smiled at me like she meant it. I'd been let down so many times before that I took her staying as proof of something real. But being there without standing up for someone, that's not loyalty. That's just proximity. And that night at her parents' table, it all came into focus. She was never going to fight for me. She just didn't want to be the one to walk away first. A few days before that dinner, we were closing up shop. Melissa leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone, not really present. Then, without looking up, she said, "My parents want to meet you. This Friday." No warning. No, I think it's time. Just dropped it like she was reading the weather report. I nodded, tried to keep my face still, but my stomach twisted. I already knew how it would go. I'd walk in at a disadvantage no matter what I wore or said. There was no competing with a family that owned car dealerships, construction companies, and even a vineyard out in Oregon they visited during harvest season. Meanwhile, I was living above my garage, barely working heat, slow drain in the shower, toilet that moaned every time it flushed. My paycheck depended on how many engines died that week. I barely slept in the days leading up to it. Spent every night thinking about how to hold my fork, what to say, how not to sound like I'd stumbled into their daughter's life by accident. Friday came. I closed the shop early, pulled out the best shirt I owned, white, clean, collar still stiff, ironed it flat right on the workbench, polished my boots until they stopped looking like they'd spent 10 hours a day on concrete, trimmed my beard to a neat edge. My truck was still up on jacks, transmission half torn apart. So I took the bus. I figured showing up humble was better than not showing up at all. The bus ride over was dead quiet, just the low hum of the engine and that little lurch every time we stopped at a red light. Nobody said a word. Nobody even looked up. Just the usual, heads down, screens glowing. Then this old man got on, had to be pushing 75. His coat was hanging off him, 2 sizes too big, and his breathing came in short, rough bursts. He shuffled up to the driver, voice trembling, saying he needed to get to Grace Memorial Hospital. His wife had fallen, was bleeding, maybe worse. The driver just stared like the man was an inconvenience instead of a human being. Everyone else kept pretending not to hear, eyes glued to their phones. So I stood up, walked to the front, and handed the driver a 20. "He's with me," I said. "Just get us there." The old man sat beside me, wheezing, his hands shaking. I asked if he was all right. He said he was just scared he'd miss her. They'd been married 58 years, and she was all he had left. His name was Walter, Korean War veteran. Worked 30 years in a steel mill before retiring. He told me, "The world doesn't make men like it used to." His eyes were cloudy, but sharp underneath. Now it's all screens and shortcuts. You hold the door for someone and they look at you like you're asking for their wallet. I told him he wasn't wrong. By the time we reached the hospital, his breathing had settled some. We got off together, and before he went inside, he turned to me, gripped my hand tight, and said, "You've got good in you, son. Don't let anyone take that from you." Then he walked inside without another word. I stood there for a minute, watching those automatic doors slide shut behind him. People brushed past me, umbrellas, suits, that usual city rush like nobody had time to breathe. But I stayed there, holding on to that one sentence. The bus stop was 6 blocks from Melissa's parents' house. I walked the rest, heart thudding harder with every step. Their street looked straight out of a magazine. Perfect lawns, brick driveways, 3-car garages, a fountain out front that served no purpose other than saying, "We can afford one." By the time I reached their place, the house was glowing like a damn showroom. Warm lights, spotless windows, porch big enough to park a truck on. I stood there a moment, checked my shirt, took a breath, and rang the bell. A man in a black suit opened the door. "You're here for Miss Melissa?" he asked, already stepping aside. I walked in, boots quiet on the marble floor. The place smelled like polished wood and expensive candles. One of those houses that looked staged for a magazine spread, not actually lived in. Then Melissa came down the stairs in a blue dress I'd never seen before. She looked incredible, she always did, but when she met my eyes there was something different, like she was already bracing for whatever was about to happen. Her dad appeared next. Tall, clean-shaven, the type who carries himself like every room's a board meeting. He shook my hand, firm like a test, and said, "You made it." "Yeah," I said, barely. He led us into the dining room, and I followed, trying to keep my breathing steady. The table looked like it cost more than my entire shop. Silverware lined up like soldiers, each piece I didn't even know how to use. I could feel their judgment before a word was said. The air was tight, like the walls themselves were watching. Still, I sat up straight, smiled, told myself, "You've made it this far. Don't fold now." Even though deep down, I already knew how this night would go. It felt less like dinner and more like walking into a courtroom. Everything around me screamed money. The chandelier above us sparkled like something pulled from a palace, and the table was this massive stretch of dark wood, polished so perfectly it reflected the ceiling. 4 of us sitting at a table that could have held 20, a fancy meal in a mansion built for people who never worked overtime. Her dad sat at the head, like a king holding court. Melissa sat to his right, her mom across from me, and I took the seat left from me at the far end like hired help. Their butler, yeah, an actual butler, poured wine into thin crystal glasses that chimed when they touched. I passed, told them I didn't drink on work nights. That earned me a raised eyebrow from her dad. Guess that was strike one. He got straight to business, asked about my shop. How many employees? None. Just me. "Do you do body work or just mechanical?" he asked. I said mostly mechanical. Oil changes, tune-ups, brakes. He nodded slowly, like he was making notes for a meeting I wasn't invited to. Her mom barely spoke, just sipped her wine and gave polite smiles that never reached her eyes. The kind of woman who probably paid someone to hang her curtains and wouldn't know where the vacuum was kept. Then came the one question I knew was coming. "Where did you go to college?" I told them I didn't. Went straight to work after high school. Her mom blinked like I'd told her I lived in a barn. Her dad leaned back, arms crossed, lips twitching like he was holding back a laugh. "No college," he said. "So you're self-taught?" "More like life-taught," I told him. "My dad was a mechanic. He taught me everything I know." That was the moment Melissa dropped her gaze to her plate and went quiet. Her mom decided to jump in. "You rent, right?" she asked, in that tone people use when they're asking if you've caught something contagious. Yeah, I said. Above my shop. It's small, but it's mine. Her dad gave this low chuckle, swirling his wine like it was part of some private joke. Must be tough fixing old cars in this economy. I let it hang for a second. People still need their cars running, I said finally, especially when they can't afford to buy a new one every few years. He gave me this polite little nod. Fair enough. But his eyes said something different, something like, "You don't belong here." Melissa stayed silent through all of it. Didn't mention how I'd helped her friend get her car started at midnight. Didn't say a word about how I'd driven across town with cold medicine when she was sick. Not even a, "He's doing what he loves." Nothing. Just that quiet that said more than words ever could. Then they asked about my family. I told them about my dad, how he'd had a stroke, how I'd moved him in with me. Her mom tilted her head like I was a stray dog doing a trick. "That's admirable," she said. "Not kind. Not strong. Not even thoughtful. Just admirable." Like she was grading a school project. Dinner dragged on like that. Tiny bites of steak I couldn't taste, forks scraping porcelain, and long silences that made the air feel heavier than it should have. By dessert, I was staring at the clock on the wall, counting down to when I could finally get up without looking rude. I cleared my throat. "I've got an early client tomorrow. Better call it a night." Her dad stood slowly, posture still perfect. "Of course, busy man." Her mom didn't bother standing, just lifted her wine glass and gave me a faint smile. Couldn't tell if it was meant to be polite or triumphant. Melissa walked me to the foyer, but stopped short of the door. No offer of a ride, no "text me when you get home," nothing. I opened the door myself and stepped out into the rain. No umbrella, no jacket, just me, cold, drenched, and hollowed out. I walked, didn't care where, didn't care how far. I just needed to move. I'd never felt smaller in my life. When I finally made it back to the shop, it was a little past 1 a.m. I was soaked through, every step echoing against the concrete like I didn't belong in my own damn place. I didn't bother flipping the lights on, just walked straight past the tools and half-finished jobs. Sat down against the wall and stared into the dark. My boots were dripping, leaving muddy prints across the floor, but I didn't take them off. I just sat there, listening to the low hum of the fridge and the ticking of the wall clock above the office door. Upstairs, my old man was asleep, probably snoring, remote still in his hand, old Western on the TV, recliner tilted halfway back like always. He didn't need to see me like that, beaten down, angry, ashamed. I sat there for nearly 2 hours. Didn't move. Didn't cry. Just clenched my jaw and tried to erase the sound of Melissa's mom asking if I rented like it was a disease. The next few days, I buried myself in work. Didn't answer texts, didn't look at social media, just fixed cars, brakes, engines, suspension, whatever came through the door, I took it. Kept my hands busy so my head wouldn't drift back to that damn dinner. Friday morning, I got in early, grease still under my fingernails from the night before. My dad was usually up by then, sitting by the window upstairs with his paper and his coffee. But that morning, something felt wrong. I was halfway through making a pot of coffee when I heard it. A heavy, sickening thud from the stairs. I ran. He was at the bottom, crumpled, one hand clutching his chest, eyes wide and lost, gasping like he'd forgotten how to breathe. I dropped to my knees, shouting his name, trying to hold him upright while I dug for my phone. His skin was gray, his mouth moving with no sound, just pain. The ambulance showed up fast, lights flashing through the garage windows while I held my dad's hand in the back. I kept telling him to hang on, to keep breathing, to stay with me. At Grace Memorial Hospital, everything moved in a blur. Monitors beeping, IV lines being hooked up, clipboards shoved at me while I stood there in my oil-stained coveralls, reeking of work and fear. A doctor finally pulled me aside. White coat, tired eyes, voice steady but worn. "Massive blockage," he said. "We're prepping him for surgery, possibly a double bypass." I didn't ask a single question, just nodded, over and over, because if I stopped moving, stopped nodding, I knew I'd break. "We'll do everything we can," he said, then disappeared behind a curtain leaving me standing in the waiting room surrounded by strangers, people coughing, kids screaming, vending machines that swallowed your change without a hint of shame. When the billing guy came over, clipboard in hand, he didn't even blink. "You're looking at about $85,000, he said like he was reading off a grocery list. I almost laughed. That number might as well have been a million. I told him we didn't have that kind of insurance. He handed me a stack of papers. Try the state program, he said, or the hospital's charity fund. I spent the next 4 hours making calls: Medicaid, state aid, local grants. Every answer was the same. No. Sorry. Maybe in 6 months. Try somewhere else. Finally, a nurse walking by whispered, "You need a miracle." I didn't answer, just nodded, grabbed my stuff, and walked outside into the heavy August heat. It hit me like a wall, but I stayed there, staring at the sky, trying to breathe through the weight in my chest. Maybe this was it. The point where everything breaks. And then came the thought I hated most, the one that burned just thinking about it. Melissa, her family, their money, the vineyard, the marble floors, those antique chairs no one even sat in. She had the means. I knew it, and I hated myself for even considering picking that phone. But my dad, he wasn't just some old man with a weak heart. He was everything I built my life around. The reason I still believed in honest work, in showing up when no one else would. He gave me his name, his tools, his shop. He gave me everything. I stood there in that parking lot for 15 minutes, the sun beating down on my shoulders, hand gripping my phone so tight it hurt. Pride didn't mean much when someone you loved was fighting to stay alive. I didn't make the call. Not yet. But the thought stuck, like a splinter I couldn't dig out. The next few nights I barely slept. Just lay there on the shop couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked slow circles, my mind running through every number, every dead end, every no I'd heard that day. Sometimes I'd go upstairs, check on my dad. He'd look up, try to smile, ask how business was going. I'd lie, tell him we were fine, that everything was handled. He didn't need the truth, not when he could barely walk from the recliner to the bed without losing his breath. But every time I saw him sitting there, wires taped to his chest, pill bottles lined up like soldiers, I felt something inside me twist tighter. By the fourth day, I broke. Paced the shop for an hour before I finally gave in and grabbed the phone. My thumb hovered over her name like it weighed a ton. When I finally pressed it, my heart was already pounding. She answered like she didn't recognize the number. No warmth. No hey. Just flat. "This is Melissa." "Melissa," I said, my voice rough. I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't life or death. Silence. Then I pushed on. "It's my dad. He needs emergency surgery, double bypass, maybe more. The hospital's demanding $95,000 up front." She cut in before I could finish. "Told you this would happen," she said. I blinked. "What?" "My parents warned me," she said, her tone sharp and cold. "They said you'd end up needing money. I just didn't think it'd be this soon." I clenched my jaw. "I'm not asking for me," I said. "I'm asking for the man who raised me, who gave up everything so I could have something. I'll pay you back. Every cent." She gave this short, bitter laugh. Not loud, not long, just enough to sting. "I'm not a bank, Jake," she said. "Don't ever call me again." That was the last thing she said before the line went dead. I stood there in the middle of the garage, phone still in my hand, staring at it like maybe the screen would light up again. Maybe she'd call back. Maybe she'd say she didn't mean it. But nothing came. The rain started outside. I didn't even notice until I saw fat drops sliding down the grimy window, cutting streaks through months of dust. I sat down right where I had before, on the floor, back against the wall. Same spot I'd ended up the night I left her parents' house. My hand was shaking. That numb, heavy cold settled deep in my chest, the kind that doesn't let go. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was worse. I felt helpless, completely lost. I had no idea what the hell to do next. Saturday morning, I was slumped on a hard bench in the hospital hallway, elbows on my knees, hands hanging like they were too tired to hold anything. The tile floor reflected the dull light, and I'd been staring at my boots so long that the dried grease on the laces had started to flake off like dust. I didn't even look up when I heard footsteps coming down the hall until I heard that voice. Rough, calm, steady. "Son, that you?" I looked up. Walter. Same tan coat, same pressed pants, same calm face that looked like it had seen the world fall apart more than once and decided to keep walking anyway. He sat down next to me without asking, like he already knew I needed someone there. "You all right?" he asked quietly. That simple question cracked something open. I didn't cry, but I told him everything. About the surgery, the bills, the calls I made, and the one I shouldn't have had to. The one to Melissa. Her silence, her laugh, that line. He just listened. No pity. No, that's tough. Just a steady nod like he'd heard this kind of pain before. After a long pause, he asked, "How much you need?" I shook my head. "Doesn't matter. I'm not asking." He tilted his head, eyes firm. "You didn't ask me to ride that bus either. You just did. That was $20. He leaned forward a little. "And this is life or death. That counts for more, not less." I didn't know what to say. My chest tightened up, pride clawing to hang on while everything else in me wanted to break. Walter pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my son." I opened my mouth to stop him, but the look on his face told me not to. 15 minutes later, a black SUV rolled up to the hospital entrance. Clean, quiet, not flashy, but solid. A man stepped out, tall, squared shoulders, jeans and a navy jacket, boots that looked broken in but polished. The kind of guy who didn't waste words. "Michael," Walter said, nodding toward me. "This is the one I told you about." Michael walked straight up, extended his hand. "Dad says you're the real deal. That's good enough for me." I shook his hand. Firm. Quick. He looked me straight in the eye, not sizing me up like Melissa's father had. This was different. He wasn't looking down on me. He was checking what I was made of. "When's the surgery scheduled?" he asked. "It's not," I said. "Can't be. Not until we pay." He nodded once, pulled out his phone, and stepped a few feet away. Started talking fast, bank terms, routing numbers, authorizations. I couldn't follow half of it. Walter leaned closer. "Michael runs a logistics outfit. 4 warehouses, 3 freight yards. He does all right." I swallowed hard. "Why me?" He smiled faintly. "Because when I needed someone, you stood up. That kind of thing sticks with a man." Michael came back a moment later. "Give the hospital your dad's info. Surgery's approved. You're covered." I just stood there, mouth half open. "Why?" He cut me off with a small shake of his head. "You'll pay it forward someday. That's enough." I started to say I'd repay every dollar, work it off, whatever it took, but he just smiled. "We're good." Then he clapped his dad on the shoulder and headed back to his SUV, walking like a man who had another 100 fires to put out before noon. Walter stood, brushing off his coat. "People think the world's all sharp corners now," he said. "But it ain't. Not always." I nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. "Go sit with your dad," he said softly. "I'll check in tomorrow." Then he turned and walked down the hallway, hands in his pockets like he'd just run an errand instead of saving a man's life. I stayed there another few minutes, heart pounding, thoughts spinning so fast I couldn't catch them. Relief doesn't hit all at once. It comes in slow waves, washing through you piece by piece. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. My shoulders felt lighter, my spine straightened. And what stuck with me most wasn't the money or the timing. It was where the help came from. Not from love. Not from loyalty. Not from someone who'd claimed to care. It came from a stranger I'd spent $10 on, and his son who trusted his father's word more than any background check or balance sheet. 2 days later, they wheeled my dad into surgery. I didn't leave that hospital once. Not for food. Not for air. I just paced that hallway for 7 straight hours, back and forth, wearing a groove into the tile like a man waiting on a verdict he couldn't change. I spent that whole day watching nurses rush in and out, listening to monitors beep behind curtains, every sound reminding me how close it could all go wrong. I kept thinking, if this goes sideways, I won't walk out of here the same man. But somehow, he pulled through. The doctor came out around 6 o'clock, pulled off his cap, and gave me a slow nod. "He's stable," he said. "Surgery went well." I sank into the nearest chair and didn't move for a long time. Just sat there, elbows on my knees, letting those words settle in piece by piece until I could finally breathe again. That night, Walter showed up. Said he just wanted to see with his own eyes that everything went okay. He brought a thermos of black coffee and a pack of powdered donuts from the vending machine. Sat beside me for nearly 2 hours without saying much, just quiet company that didn't need explaining. The next morning, Michael came by straight from a meeting, still in his dress shirt and slacks. He had 2 coffees and a paper bag in hand. "The nurses told me the cafeteria food's garbage," he said. "Figured I'd bring something that won't kill you." He kept the mood light, asking the nurses how my dad was doing, cracking jokes about the waiting room paint color, even managed to make one of the techs laugh, a woman who looked like she hadn't smiled in weeks. Over the next several weeks, those 2 men, neither of them blood, showed up more than anyone else. They visited, checked in, brought food, asked about the shop, made sure I wasn't falling apart. My dad got a little stronger every day. First, he could sit up, then he managed a few steps. Before long, he was giving the nurses hell about the hospital remote. By week 4, he looked like himself again. Pale, sure, thinner, but sharp. His eyes were tired, but that fire was still there, the same stubbornness that had raised me. One afternoon, while he was doing his slow laps down the hallway with his IV stand, Michael and I sat outside in the hospital garden. Cheap plastic chairs, coffee that tasted like burnt paper. The sun was weak but steady. "You ever think about expanding?" he asked, out of nowhere. I raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a job?" He shook his head. "No, I'm talking about your shop, your work. You've got real skill, Jake, not just quick fixes. You've got vision. That garage of yours is like trying to stuff a V8 into a go-kart frame." I laughed a little. "Yeah, well, dreams don't pay rent." He leaned forward. "They can, if you've got the right backing." I went quiet, waiting for the catch. There's always a catch. He met my eyes and said, "Tell me what you really want. No fluff." So I did. I told him everything, how I'd always dreamed of having a real setup, multiple bays with lifts, custom tools, a paint room, a place where we could do full restorations. I wanted to bring old machines back to life. Trucks, muscle cars, bikes, hell, even tractors. If someone loved it enough, I wanted to make it run again. Michael listened, didn't interrupt, just nodded once. 5 weeks later, we were sitting in a commercial office on the west side of town, signing the papers. New space, 3 times the size of the old garage, 2 lifts, separate paint room, storage out back. Michael fronted the investment, but he didn't treat it like charity. It was a partnership. Clean, fair, both our names on the paperwork. "You've got skin in the game now," he said. "Don't forget that." And I didn't, not for 1 second. We spent days moving equipment. Michael sent a few guys from his warehouse to help with the heavy lifting. I hauled over every wrench, compressor, and grease gun I owned, cleaned them, labeled them, said everything exactly how I'd always pictured it. The day we officially opened, I brought my dad over in the truck. He'd been home for a few weeks, still weak, but moving better. I helped him down from the cab, walked him slowly across the lot, and opened the new garage door. He stepped inside and just stopped. Looked around at the clean floor, the new lifts, the fresh paint, my tools lined up neat as soldiers. Then he cried. Didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, hands trembling, eyes locked on the sign above the office door, "Second Chance Garage." Finally, he turned to me, voice rough but steady. "You did good, son." That one sentence made every sleepless night, every slammed door, every doubt worth it. 8 months later, the permanent sign went up, big red letters on a brushed metal plate bolted right into the brick above the doors. "Second Chance Garage." Michael stood beside me, drill in hand, while I tightened the last bolt. My dad sat behind us in a lawn chair, flannel shirt over his shoulders, coffee cup in hand, grinning like a proud old general watching his unit stand at attention. The place finally looked real. Not some side hustle, not a dream. A real shop with soul and muscle. Concrete floors polished to a shine, lifts gleaming under bright lights, tool cabinets lined in perfect rows along the back wall. Our first job? My dad's old '72 Ford. That truck had sat out beside the shop for years, rust creeping over every inch, interior shredded, engine coughing like it was on its last breath. He'd tried to fix it a dozen times, but something always got in the way. Bills, injuries, life. Now, we were doing it right. We stripped it all down, wiring, frame, every last piece, and built it back from the bones up. My dad sat nearby in a folding chair, tossing out advice, cursing every stubborn bolt, grinning every time it started to look like a truck again. We finished it 2 days before the grand opening. Backed it out onto the lot that morning, chrome glinting in the sunlight, engine purring like it was 1972 all over again. That same morning, Walter showed up with his grandkids, 2 little boys in matching ball caps, bouncing with questions about every car, every tool, every smell of grease and paint. Walter stood there, arms crossed, eyes shining with pride. He looked around like this whole thing belonged to him too, like we were family now. Michael came dressed in a polo with the shop's name stitched right on it, his idea. Said we ought to look official for the ribbon cutting. He handed me the scissors and stepped back. Cameras flashed. People clapped. I didn't make a speech, didn't say a word. I just cut the ribbon and pushed the doors open. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, honest, earned. That night, my phone buzzed, a message from Melissa. Saw the article, congrats. That was it. No, I'm sorry. No, I was wrong. No, how's your dad? Just that short, polite sentence, like she was checking a box on her conscience before bedtime. I stared at it for a full minute, maybe more. Then I set the phone down. I wasn't angry, wasn't even sad. I was just done. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. Because right then I understood something clear as day. Some people vanish when things get hard because that's all they know how to do. They leave when the cracks show. They run from the weight. But others, they show up, even when it's ugly, especially when it's ugly. And me, I kept showing up through the bills, the busted lifts, the slow months, the late nights when the heater quit and my hands were too stiff to hold a wrench. People noticed. The local paper ran a full feature the next week. Headline read, "From Rust to Redemption, the garage that started with nothing." There was a photo of me and my dad standing beside that Ford, arms over each other's shoulders, both squinting into the sun. The story told it right, named Walter and Michael by name, told the whole town what it took to get there. We framed the article and hung it by the front counter. Folks started coming in just to see it. Some didn't even need repairs, they just wanted to shake a hand. Say it meant something to see a place built with sweat and grit instead of investors and slogans. And every time a new customer walked in, I thought back to that diner, the night I sat drenched to the bone, feeling invisible. Now, I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't a ghost. I was a man with roots. Not because life got easier, but because I refused to quit when it got hard. That night, rain came down sideways, sheets of it hammering the windows like the storm was trying to get inside. I was under the hood of a '68 Camaro, racing to meet a Friday deadline when the bell over the front door rang. I wiped my hands on a rag and came around the corner. A teenage girl stood there, drenched from head to toe, hoodie plastered to her arms, shoes squishing water onto the floor. "Sorry," she said, voice trembling. "My car broke down on Route 40. Tried calling around, but no one picked up. I don't have cash for a tow." She looked like she'd been walking in that rain for miles, and from the way she flinched when the door shut behind her, I knew every other place she'd tried must have turned her away. I nodded toward the couch in the corner. "Sit down. Warm up." She hesitated, still half shivering, like she didn't trust it was real. I grabbed a towel from the sink and poured her a styrofoam cup of the cheap coffee we always kept ready. "Here," I said, handing them both over. "You're all right now." She took them quietly, curled up on the couch, steam from the coffee rising between her hands like something fragile but alive. I didn't ask questions. Not who she was, not where she came from, not what she was running from. Next morning, me and one of the new guys went out and towed her car in ourselves. Starter was completely shot. The battery was almost dead, but I had it fixed before lunch. When I handed the girl her keys, she blinked like she didn't quite believe what was happening. "How much?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "You're good." She stared at me like I'd just given her something she didn't know how to accept. "Why'd you help me?" she asked. Not suspicious, just curious, the kind of question that comes from someone who's not used to kindness. I thought about it for a second, then looked her straight in the eye. "Because someone once did the same for me," I said. "That's how the world changes." She didn't respond right away, just stood there, fingers tight around her keys, eyes shining but holding back the tears. Then she nodded once, turned, and stepped out into the sunlight. The rain had finally stopped. Her engine started clean, running smooth as she drove off down the road. Upstairs, my dad was at the window, watching from the loft. He'd seen the whole thing. When I looked up, he gave me that small, knowing smile, the one that said, "You didn't just fix the car, son. You fixed something bigger." I stayed there for a while after she left, just standing in the quiet hum of the shop, thinking about how it all started, with nothing but rain pouring down, no umbrella, no ride, and no respect. Just soaked shoes and a seat at a table where I never belonged. I thought about how I clawed my way out of that night, not because someone rescued me, but because I kept showing up until the right people appeared. I thought about Melissa, how silent she'd been when it mattered most, how her quiet back then felt like the end of everything. But now I realized it wasn't the end, it was the start. Her silence made space for people like Walter, like Michael. Like that girl who walked into my shop drenched and scared. People who don't just talk, they show up. My hands still smelled like oil. My boots were still scuffed from years of concrete floors. But I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth to anyone. I had my shop. I had my old man alive, proud, watching from the window, Lincoln Day. And I had people around me who saw value where others only saw dirt. And that was worth more than every fancy house or family estate on earth. So, tell me, would you have called Melissa if you were in my shoes, or would you have held on to your pride? Drop your answer in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. And as always, thank you for watching.